Are you planning a house extension, but you're struggling to visualize what the end result will look like from the plans? Today's chat with Dr. Paulina Trevena could be just what you need to help you to figure it all out. We're going to talk about aphantasia, which might be the reason that you're struggling to visualize what your home will look like, as well as we're going to look about things that you might be able to do to help you. So first, let me introduce you to Dr. Paulina Trevena. She is a hypnotherapist and a researcher specialised in aphantasia and hypnosis. And after nearly 20 years in academic research, Paulina became certified hypnotherapist and started to coach and support people with aphantasia and ADHD so that they can really thrive. And her mission is to make hypnotherapy accessible to people with aphantasia and ADHD and to raise awareness of aphantasia. So hello, Paulina, it's great to have you and thank you for joining me. Is there anything there that I missed that's sort of you think I should introduce you with? Any further points I should make?
No, thank you, Jane. I think that was perfect. And thanks so much for the invitation. I'm very excited to speak to a completely different audience than I usually do.
Oh, yeah, well, this is it. Yeah, it's an interesting thing to think about. I often get clients who are struggling to visualize. You know, they look at plans, but they can't see how that's going to look to their home. So I don't know if they have aphantasia, but let's start there. I mean, what is aphantasia and what challenges do people with aphantasia face? And is that how you say it? Is that the right way to say it?
You know what, to be honest, I think the British pronunciation is aphantasia. I hear it pronounced in different ways depending on the country, depending on the person. So at the end of the day, I just think pronounce it whichever way sits well with you. But maybe just start from, because you said, so I have clients that have difficulty in kind of placing, visualizing things. I don't know if they have aphantasia or not. So maybe before I go into the details of what aphantasia is, let me explain or try to explain it in a really simple way by doing the so-called apple test, which is just a test to check if someone can or cannot visualize. It's a very simple one. So maybe if you could just, Jane, if I could just ask you to close your eyes for me for a moment and just imagine a red apple. Like picture the apple as clearly as you can in your mind's eye.
Mm-hmm.
And just tell me, can you see it?
Do you know, it's kind of weird. I know what, like, I can sort of imagine a red apple with a stalk, but I can't see it exactly. It's more, I can just see darkness, but I know what a red apple with a stalk looks like with all the glossy bits. I could draw it for you.
Yeah. Okay. Well, in that case, it kind of sounds like you might have aphantasia.
I don't know.
Because it does sound like it, because most people, when I ask them the question, they will say, oh yeah, I could see it, it's red, it's like really shiny. Or some people have, immediately say, oh, I can see like a whole bowl of apples, or there's an apple tree or whatever. And so some people could immediately have this picture. And I think if you immediately have this picture, you kind of know that you can visualize because you have the picture. If your client or anyone else says what you said to me a moment ago, I can kind of think of it, but it's dark there. I can't really see it. To me, that sounds like aphantasia.
It's so strange, because I was thinking, like, if I'm playing Pictionary, I'm really, really good at Pictionary.
Right, so, whatever that is, right?
So, okay, so do you not know that, okay, the game Pictionary, it's a brilliant game. This is a little bit of a sidetrack, but what happens, it's a sort of game that we play like at Christmas, after we've eaten and everyone's still at the table, and you split into two teams, and on each team you take it in turns to be the person who draws, and you pick a card, and I think there's different kinds of Pictionary. We have like it's not the original version, but what happens is you pick up a card and it might say apple, for example.
Yeah.
And so the person who's drawing from each team has to draw an apple and show their picture to the rest of their team, and the team that recognizes what that picture is of and says the right word wins.
Okay. So you're
So
good at drawing?
I'm really good at drawing. So if you say to me apple, I could draw you an apple really easily. So I don't know.
Okay.
And I can also, I'm really good at like guided visualizations. I do get more images then, but it's just like if you say to me, think of an apple, that's kind of, I find that harder. That doesn't
right. Okay. Okay, so let's dig a bit deeper into that. So maybe let me just explain at this point that aphantasia is understood as a lack of a mind's eye and often other forms of mental imagery. So the term was only coined in 2015, so it's not even been 10 years since the term has been coined, and awareness of it is still low, right? But what we know so far is about 4% of the population has it, and it's basically this difficulty in drawing, in conjuring up pictures or other forms of mental imagery in your head. So, and I would like to make one thing clear, because often people think if they can't visualize something in their head as clearly as in real life, that means they're a non-visualizer, or that means that they have aphantasia. And that's a misconception, because the majority of people are somewhere in between the spectrum between, you know, being able to see things as real as in real life in your mind's eye, and not being able to see anything at all. So most people can kind of see something. It might be, you know, the picture might be colorful, the picture might be fairly clear, but not as clear as in real life, because that's hyperphantasia. That's a kind of unique ability. It's the other side of the spectrum. And in terms of aphantasia, so it was initially kind of defined through the visual, and the visual sense is the one that aphantasics either don't have at all or have a really, really weak. It's more of a, you know, they might kind of see something. It's a very dim image, right? But with time, researchers realized, and that was something that was really strongly coming through my research as well, that that it's not just about the visual sense, it's about other senses as well. So an internal sense of hearing, or I forgot what the senses are now. Hearing, taste, smell, touch, exactly, and movement. So some people with aphantasia, most people with aphantasia actually cannot visualize things, and other internal senses are also affected. Maybe not all of them, but some of them. Some people are like me, I can't see anything, I can't feel I can't tap into any form of mental imagery. So I'm like in the 25% of aphantasics who can't relate to any mental imagery at all. There's just nothing there to feel, to smell, to touch, and so on. And I see a big difference. You know, as a hypnotherapist, I use a lot of visual methods. I mean, not with everyone, because with aphantasics, that's the whole reason why I'm doing the research, because I don't want to use visual methods with people who can't really do guided imagery and so on. But what I find is that some aphantasics, you know, maybe they don't have the visual at all, but they have a really strong other internal sense, or they have a really strong feeling, and they can relate to that, and they can kind of follow mental imagery that relates to that sense. So there's a lot of individual differences, but in terms of the core definition, it's like if you cannot picture things in your mind's eye, then you're aphantasic. And I can also see it depends on the context. So as you said, some people are like, oh, when you're telling me to see an apple, I can't see anything. But if I kind of let my imagination roam free and just let any images come to me, maybe that's when I can see something. So I think there's also a spectrum there.
And I wonder also like how relaxed, you know, like if I feel like I'm put on the spot, not necessarily my most relaxed feeling, like, oh, I've got to see an apple now. Whereas, you know, I've done a lot of meditation and things like that, where and a lot of guided meditation, where you're sort of imagining a sunset, and or, you know, the colors and the warmth and all of that sort of thing. And in that kind of very relaxed state, I from what I can remember, it's been a while since I've done that, but I think that I do see something. So I think maybe it depends on on the situation for me, like how
Yeah.
relaxed I am.
And I think just, do you dream visually?
Yeah.
Visual dreams. So I think it also, when you mentioned the state, I think there's also something about brain waves and what state your mind is in. Because what I'm also observing, and I don't know of any research on this at this point, but what I'm observing in the people that I work with, the people that I speak to that have aphantasia, is that those people who do have visual dreams and are put in this relaxed state of mind. So then your mind is in the so-called hypnagogic state. So it's somewhere between being awake and being in REM sleep. And at that point, some images can come to some people because you're in between. And if you can dream in visuals, I mean, if you do have visual dreams, then I see that happening to people that, as you say, when the mind is in a really relaxed state, somewhere in between a dream and reality, images just kind of come. Whether you can steer those images, whether you can voluntarily kind of conjure them up, that's a different matter. But but that's something that I'm observing as well.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, and then going back to the Pictionary game, and where, say for example, you get the prompt. I remember playing once, and the prompt was kebab, and
Right.
and we had to draw. So drawing a kebab. I don't recall really seeing a kebab in my mind, but just being able to, knowing what it looks like and being able to draw it. But I'm not sure if I recognize when I can see it in a way, if that makes sense. But so if you are struggling to visualize things, and this is where you would say possibly you have aphantasia, and then what difficulties does that present for you in life in general, or for specific situations? Obviously, if you're looking at doing some work to your home and you're wanting to change the way your home looks, like choosing paint colors and things like that, could be really difficult.
Yes. Yeah, so I can speak from my own experience about that one. Because in general, aphantasia, as I say, I mentioned that it affects all senses and so on, but it's much more. It affects individuals in different ways, because what we're also seeing is there's a lot of individual variation. Not all aphantasics are the same. And in fact, I think we see more variation than in any other. Well, I can't say in any other condition, I have no comparison, but there's just so much individual differences, so many differences. And one of them is, for example, that some people, including me, also have SDAM, that's severely deficient autobiographical memory. So we have really big problems with recollecting memories, basically, from our own life. So it's not about, it doesn't have to have anything to do with learning, but it's just remembering things from your own past, right? Things that happened. Sometimes that's just like people say to me, "Oh, remember we were here and there and you did that and that," and I'm looking at them thinking, it's almost like somebody's telling me about some film that I've played in, because I have no recollection whatsoever of that, right? So that can be a bit unsettling to some people sometimes. But in general, yeah.
In that situation, then, if you were to see photographs of you in that situation, would that then remind you of that experience? Or
I think that's very individual, because that's something that I'm observing as well in terms of memory, that people's memory is triggered by different factors. So I noticed that a lot of memories for me personally are triggered by music. Like, I suddenly remember a song that I used to play a lot when I was a teenager, and that kind of brings me back to that time. For other people, it can be photographs, it can be a smell. So again, there's a lot of individual variation there.
I haven't done a lot of work in this area, but there are a lot of architects working. I mean, care homes is a huge growth industry in a way for in the construction world. There are a lot of care homes being built and designed, and in particular focusing on spaces for people who have dementia and looking at how to help them to maintain some sense of themselves and some memory of themselves. And so I think sense and having places to keep photographs and personal mementos that could help to trigger memories seems to be a big thing in that field of design. Like I say, it's not a field that I have a lot of experience in, but that's what I've heard and understood. So is there some link there with that and dementia, that kind of things that's happening?
We don't know. At this point, we don't know. I get asked that sometimes, but it's difficult for me to answer because there's no data, right? So I can't really answer. I don't think there's necessarily a link, but we don't know. But in general, aphantasia is not seen as an impairment, right? It's not seen as a medical condition. There is no formal diagnosis for it, and in terms of everyday life, it can be maybe a bit of a challenge sometimes, but it's not, it's not a debilitating condition or anything. It doesn't stop you doing anything. Now, but there are some contexts where it does appear as a problem or as a barrier. And for me personally, and that's why I started doing my research into aphantasia and hypnosis, was that when I, came across hypnosis the first time, I was absolutely fascinated. It's an absolutely wonderful modality for therapy, for healing, and I got so fascinated and just so into it that I really wanted to train in it. And then when I started training in hypnosis, it appeared that I'm a really difficult hypnosis subject. I was doing live training, people were practicing on me, and it was really difficult because so many of the techniques that I was being trained in were very visual, all related to other senses. And there were other aspects to it as well, like suggestions like, oh, your arm is stiffening, feel your arm stiffening, like your arm is as stiff as a bar of steel. And I would never get that feeling. So I could always, other people would be just like floored, not being able to move their arm. That has never happened to me, never, ever, ever. So I can see that in terms of suggestibility for hypnosis, there's a, but never mind, that's kind of, I'm speaking shock now. But just to say that in these contexts, so in contexts where visualization is used as a technique or as a modality, so, and even in the context of learning, so I've come across parents of kids that are getting in contact with me saying, my child, has difficulty with reading and writing, and all the tutors that I've spoken to, they all use mental imagery, and my kids got aphantasia, they can't see the letters, they can't tap into that. So it can be a barrier there, or things like mental maths, in school, where you're supposed to hold a lot of numbers in your head. Sometimes if you can't visualize, that is really difficult because you don't have that additional kind of modality, to refer to. And so as I say, it's not an impairment, but when it comes to certain things, it can be a barrier. And specifically for what you mentioned in terms of home design or interior design, something that I really, really struggled with during my own home renovation a few years back. And it was a general home renovation. It was an absolute nightmare, to be honest. There were so many things going wrong, but never mind. But the thing I was really, really struggling with imagining what things would look like. And it didn't even occur to me at the time that it might, I don't even know if I knew that I was aphantasic at the time. Because just to mention, I'm aware of it now, but a lot of people just go through life thinking that, picture things in your head is a figure of speech. We have no idea that other people can actually see things in their head. That was one of the biggest shocks of my life, I have to say.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah. So it's like you just living your life as yeah. It's from your lived experience. That's not something that you do, so you're not, and you can't see into somebody else's head, you can't yeah. see what they can see, so it's not necessarily possible to be aware of if you're actually different or not to other people in that sense, because it's a completely internal thing.
Yeah, and it usually, for me, it was in the context of psychotherapy that I only realized, because the psychotherapist was like, oh, go back to your childhood home, and what can you see? And I'm like, nothing. thinking, is this woman actually mad? And but it so happens that she has aphantasia herself, so she was aware of it, quite early on. And she was like, oh, okay, what about your mum's face? Can you, like, when you imagine your mum's face, can you see it? I was like, no. And then she did the apple test on me, and she said, imagine an apple and turn it around in your head. And at that point, I just burst out laughing hysterically, because she said, can you do that? And I was just like, of course not. Like, who can do this? And she said to me, about 99% of the population. And I said, what? So because that was the estimate at the time. It's still the estimate that it's 1% that can't see anything at all. It's just black there, and the other 3% kind of maybe have some glimmer of image from time to time. But anyway, but kind of going back, so people might not even notice, until they're put in this context where you're directly really comparing your imagination with other people. Like when I was training in hypnosis, like sometimes when people go, to meditation classes and start speaking about what they saw during a guided meditation or something, I think it's those contexts that really bring that to the fore. But in terms of everyday life, we think in a different way. It's a different way, different cognitive setup. So we're not depending on the visual, on seeing pictures in our mind to remember, to learn things. So we don't even realize that other people might have that that thing as an additional as an additional reference, or as the main reference. But in terms of the home renovation or interior design, so I was really, really, really struggling to just imagine what things might look like, to imagine what would look good and what wouldn't look good. As you said, choosing paint color, that was a nightmare. I think I'd literally come back home with about 40 samples over the weeks, because I'd buy a few samples. And then, the other thing is, the samples, usually the color you see on the tin is a bit different than the color you see on the wall, right? So I would be mixing all those colors, and it would be just, and I'd get really stressed, because people were waiting on me to make decisions, and I'd still be like, but that's not the color I wanted, that's not the tiles I wanted. But I didn't know what I wanted, because I couldn't quite picture what it would look like. And it got to the it got to the stage where I literally had to stop work, because I was still looking for the tiles, right? Because I was like, no, I know I don't want these ones, but I don't know which ones I want. And I was looking for these tiles everywhere. And because I had such trouble, I couldn't visualize anything. What I was doing was basically driving around shops, going to various home improvement shops and tile shops and what have you, and IKEA, literally with the materials that I've already decided I'm going to use. I was literally going into IKEA with a big tile, like a 30 by 30 tile. But I was thinking of putting on the kitchen floor. I was going there with a piece of wood that I was thinking of using as the table, the kitchen tabletop. And I still remember just walking around with these planks of wood and flooring and a piece of cardboard where I had my paint, literally putting it against different things, and just looking, does that make sense? Is that going to look good, or is it not going to look good? Because there was no other way I could do it. And I had samples at home. I don't even know how many samples I ordered, like dozens. And again, it was literally sitting like a kid and putting this against this and then against that, and kind of piecing all the pieces together. But I really struggled. It was a really difficult process. And then I remember that, for example, with the bathroom, right, because I didn't have an interior designer, I didn't have an architect. I was trying to work, I had a builder, and I was trying to work things out myself. So I remember with the bathroom, I was literally sitting there. I'm not great at drawing, let's put it that way, but I drew the bathroom more or less to scale. And I literally, because I couldn't quite imagine if I put a bath there and then I put a shower, is that going to work? Is it going to be enough space? Not enough space? I literally cut out, all those pieces to scale, and I was moving them around the bathroom plan to see if that fits. So I was using as many kind of external visual cues as I only could.
But to be honest, those things are really, I mean, they're really well used tools that pretty much all interior designers, all architects use. If you put together a mood board or a vision board or a sample board, where you're talking about actually having pieces of samples of materials. I mean, I actually have like lots of, you often get sent samples of materials, and they tend to come in coaster sizes so that you can test them out. So this is like a resin bound paving sample, which is what I put my tea on. And so but having those sample boards where you literally stick down together the samples and pieces of the paint samples, you can order them in rather than the paint, you can order like kind of pre-painted pages of the color as well. Maybe that's more something that professionals do, but you can stick all of these samples together and look at it more as a color story, and then sketching views of the space and putting it in Photoshop and playing around different colors in Photoshop, those sorts of things. Or now you can use AI as well. It's quite a good tool to describe the colors and the materials that you want, and tell it what color you want your ceiling to be and so on, and it can kind of do that for you. Those externally visual tools are really useful for, I think, as far as I know, like that's something that everybody within the industry does use and rely on. As not I don't know how much people need it for their own. I think it does help to figure out what design you want, because you maybe would put different samples together and compare different mood boards. I remember doing for one project years ago, I put together several sample boards, different themes, and in order to show to the clients and for them to choose from. So they're really good ways of communicating with other people, because as a designer, you've got some ideas, but even whether you can picture that mentally or not, you can't show somebody else your picture. So you have to use something external to be able to communicate that. So what you were doing is kind of what if you had been working with, say, an interior designer to choose all of those materials, that's what the interior designer would have been doing with you as well. They would have been showing you samples and asking you if you liked those combinations. So it kind of would have been the same.
I mean, because I did consult a few designers, but it didn't quite, what they were doing didn't quite resonate with me, let's put it that way. But I think so I think it's great that everybody, that people usually do this, because obviously not just non-visualizers need it. But what I think what I was also struggling with was, even if people, like, I would go to IKEA, they would design the kitchen, right? And I'd look at the kitchen and so you can see the design, but it still wasn't, I couldn't get a kind of, I think they made 6 designs for me. I think the guy wanted to kill me, basically, because I still couldn't quite get my head around it or get a feel for it. And, and so happens I absolutely love interior design and architecture and all these, I watch a lot of that kind of shows. And for me, my top shows were things like Your Home Made Perfect. I don't know if you've seen it on BBC Two, or I think it was BBC Two. And the reason why I loved it so much was, it's not just that you can see the materials. It's not just that you can see the design, but you're actually in it. You can move around it and you can see. And I think, with my brain, I think that's the type of thing that I would really need to imagine how things, to see. You don't need to imagine, you can see what these things look like in a real setting, or in a realistic setting, because otherwise I was looking at these designs and I couldn't really, I don't know, I just couldn't
The
work out.
virtual reality. I know some
Yeah,
people,
yeah.
they get a bit like seasick when they're in this virtual reality world, because it kind of feels a little bit strange. But yeah, the technology for VR
Yeah,
is definitely there. I'd say for most homeowners working with most designers who operate within that within the home design, until you're getting to the more of the luxury end, the premium end, and obviously you're spending more money on that.
yeah,
Most of those designers don't have access
yeah,
to those sorts
to
of
those
things.
kind of tools. Yeah,
I mean, I use a 3D program, so when I'm drawing my clients' projects, I'm literally building a three-dimensional model. And so I
yeah.
do sometimes show them the like walkthroughs, but it's much faster. The very fast initial exploration of different ideas is always done with floor plans, which I think for some people that is a real struggle, because if they really struggle to translate from a floor plan to
With the
reality. And
space. Yeah.
yeah, and is it similar, because I know there's a lot of people who struggle to read maps and use maps to orientate. Is that related to aphantasia as well?
Not necessarily, because actually, like the research shows that people with aphantasia have very good spatial awareness. Most
Okay.
people, not all people, because again, there's a lot of individual variation, but spatial awareness in terms of knowing, like if you ask me how many windows are in the house or something, I don't need to count. I mean, I don't need to go and look, I can kind of count through them in my head, even though I can't see them. I kind of know, where they are in the house. And I know that with maps, I was always the person leading other people reading the map, because I had very good orientation. But in terms of a feeling for what things are going to look like in the space, how much space they're going to take in the space, I think that can be much trickier. But I'm not quite sure, like listening to you, I'm not quite sure if that can be aphantasia specific, or if it's just most people just cannot get that. Because I'm kind of wondering if somebody is a really good visualizer, and I don't know, because I've not asked people this question, but can they just think, oh, okay, I can see this cabinet here, and I can see this wardrobe there, and I have a sense of how much space they might be taking, what they might look like in the room, or not. I don't know, because I don't have that ability. But for me, it's a definite no. And that's why, as I said, that's why I really loved the kind of, the 3D VR, you're standing there. But I think, of course, that's, as you say, it's the high end, right? It's not every architect or interior designer that has that kind of gadget, but and that kind of option. But I'm thinking even just I don't know if you've ever seen, there's another show, which is Australian one, which is called Deadline Design, with Shina Blaze, I think. So what she does is she takes, well, again, that's a bit higher end. She's got her own studio. It's a big studio, right? But what she does is she takes people into what would be the kitchen, not in terms of a 3D. I mean, she doesn't have, she has a mood board, but apart from that, she has blocks standing. As she has the kitchen laid out basically with white blocks, just to show people how much space they're going to have, what it might feel like, what it might look like. And I'm kind of thinking, of course, I understand that's not possible for everybody to do, but I'm thinking if there's an option of actually doing that in the space, in your client's space, even to measure things up and just show them how the space is going to change if they shift things around, or if that's somehow possible. I think that would be a big help, because then it gives you a real feel for
that's
the
interesting. So she has a studio set up then, basically like almost like a one-to-one model, really, because you can
Yeah,
create little models, can be quite useful, like
yeah,
small scale models where, okay,
yeah.
you're not, and you can actually get, I mean, I don't know that people get these that often, but you can get these little tiny, almost like a periscope, where you're looking into it and then it's giving you like a view, like you can move that around your little tiny model, so it's almost like a pre
Legoland.
like a pre virtual reality thing where
Yeah,
it's a small scale model.
yeah.
But yeah, I actually have suggested that to clients of mine to so recent clients we were designing a home office for, and the space was going to be quite narrow, and I wanted to make sure that that width was going to be comfortable for her. It just fit the size of desk that she had, so it was
Yeah.
just the width of the desk. And so what I suggested to her was to set up that space with, she had
Yeah.
a kind of bookshelf, and I
Mm-hmm.
suggested that she might set up a space in her living room where she was, she had set up as her office, and put her desk there in the corner and have the bookcase there, and just test out that space and work within that space and see how that was for her. And she did
Mm-hmm.
that for a while. She said, and that really helped her decide that actually that was
Yeah.
going to be fine for her.
Mm-hmm.
Other clients I've had sort of had a couple who were recently retired, and all their life they'd had a kitchen that was, on its own, separate from a dining space, and she had felt like she did the majority of the cooking, quite traditional setup, and she often felt kind of quite isolated from the social aspect of entertaining, where her
Mm-hmm.
husband was there entertaining the guests at the dining table and she was on her own in the
Yeah,
kitchen
yeah.
doing cooking, kind of thing. And she really wanted to have, well, they really enjoyed entertaining and socializing, and they wanted to do more of that, but she didn't want to feel like she was on her own anymore.
Mm-hmm.
But she also, one of the things that she said to me was, I don't want a kitchen island, I don't want one of those open plan kitchens. And I was like,
Mm.
well, that's, if you really want this kind of sociable, you're all together, and when you're out of the room, or when you're in the kitchen space, you're not actually out of the room and separate, then
Yeah.
perhaps it's a good idea to find a way to test out that space. Maybe go and rent a holiday cottage with that kind of open plan kitchen diner
Yeah.
setup, so that you can actually live in it for a little bit and see what
Mm-hmm.
it's like. So yeah, those sorts of things do seem to help my clients when they're not sure if it's a kind of space that they've never experienced before, and so they don't have something to draw on, any memories or any knowledge of that kind of space to draw on, and to know if it's really going to be right for them and feel and work well for them.
Mm-hmm. I love that approach because it's kind of making things as real as possible, right? For for your clients, because it's only hit me now, when we were talking, when we've been kind of talking through all of this, that because I think I kind of consulted two interior designers, and yes, they came with the samples, with the floor plans, but I think what I was still struggling with is, well, one thing was a difference in taste, that one of them just did not quite want to take on board that their taste is not my taste. And most clients might love that, but I'm not going to love that, and I know it already. But I was going once. So with the samples, if I can see the samples, on a, I don't know, on the floor, on the table together, then I can say, oh, okay, I think this material goes with this, I think this color goes with this, okay, that's fine. But I still had problems with imagining them in space. So what I would do, I'd spent so much money on samples and so on, because I even bought an IKEA cabinet door, just one, to put in the kitchen I had at the time, and see if I actually like the color, if it actually works for me. So it wasn't enough for me to just see the sample. I actually had to see it in the space. And I think the thing was, I had this old school kitchen, and I was looking at what you call them, high gloss high gloss cabinets. And I was thinking, I'm not sure if I want a high gloss cabinet in this color, because I realized that I can see my reflection in it when I was sitting in the living room. And I was sitting there thinking, I'm not sure if I like that, you know. So I literally had to take everything and, you know, and I had samples stuck on the walls everywhere so that I could, walking past them, I could see them and make sure that that is the color that I wanted. So it was when you know what you've just been mentioning, it was almost recreating this kind of, trying to, with the small samples I had, to recreate this 3D experience of actually walking myself through this new space. So
Oh,
I do love that.
I really admire your dedication to trying it out, because I think
Yeah.
that's something that I think a lot of people really struggle. I think a lot of people go to work with interior designers and architects because they really struggle to visualize that for themselves, and they need to have that. Sometimes it's
Guide.
reassurance from someone else that it's going to work, and that this can be put together in this way, or or they're just really struggling to make the decisions. It's almost like outsourcing that decision. Someone else makes the decision for you, and if you know that you like their style in general, then maybe you can be more confident that you're going to like the outcome that they choose for you. So it's yeah, I mean, it's a lot of work what you did, really, to do that.
It was a lot of work, and I can tell you, I annoyed more than one person with all this. This color, this cabinet, and it did delay work. I did actually delay work because of being so indecisive, right? But you've just reminded me that that's another thing this lady from this Australian show was doing that I really loved. That she would kind of find out what style the clients more or less liked, what they were thinking, and then she would take them into an interior where people had it decorated in that style and said, okay, have a look around, how do you like it? And then some people would realize that, yeah, that's exactly spot on, that's what we like. And other people were like, now that I see it, I'm actually not quite sure. So it seems like it's not just for people with aphantasia. There might be a lot of people, as you say, just struggling to really, even if they can visualize, maybe they're not great visualizers, maybe it's something more than just about visualization, but it seems like a lot of people are struggling with that. So
yeah, or perhaps the figures on aphantasia are not right, and perhaps more people have aphantasia than we know.
Well, that's how I feel, to be honest, because as I say, at the moment, the estimate is it's around 4%, but I keep coming, I mean, I know I talk about it a lot, but I keep coming across so many people with the condition in you know, not in my own circles, but I go to business networking or somewhere and people are like, oh, that's me. And I think, how is it possible that I keep coming across these people, and it's more than, you know, 1 in 100 or 4 in 100 that I keep coming across. So I think maybe it's a bit like with ADHD or autism, that the higher the awareness is in the general public, and the more we'll find that it's a more common condition that we think at the moment. I do think there might be something there.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So it sounds as though really the best approaches, if you are struggling to visualize, are to use these sort of external methods that will help you to understand what it is going to look like from being able to actually see it outside of yourself, rather than trying or struggling to see something internally and then not being able to. So that's really, really interesting. I actually have it's a very quick and easy process for people to. It's a £9 at the moment. It's £9. Little, like a kind of mini training that teaches you how to use Pinterest, which is a great tool to be able to see lots of different pictures, images of the other, you know, if you can search on there for like pink living room, for example, or green living room with yellow floor, or whatever, anything you like, you can search anything and there will be pictures there. And so you can start to see images that you like. And so my process helps you to find the images that you like, and then identify what it is in those images that are the common recurring themes that you're appreciating and that you're loving and you're drawn to, and then to create a kind of a brief, a description of what you love from that, which you can then use to create your own mood board to help you to put that together. And also you can use it to then create a prompt for an AI image generating thing to then put that in, because you might not find the Pinterest image that shows exactly, you know, your room that has this kind of patio door and this kind of fireplace and this, you know, this particular flooring. You might not find that combination exactly as an example, but you can create that using an AI image generator, and, you know, add in your colors, add in the kind of sofa that you want and the kind of rug and the coffee table and all of those things, so that you can create your own image to help you to visualize. So I'll put a link for that below. How can people find you, and where can they go to find out more about your work if they're thinking, oh, actually maybe I have aphantasia, I'd like to find out more about it, I'm interested in you know, possibly if they're thinking about hypnosis for hypnotherapy for themselves, but they've been struggling that hasn't worked for them before, how could they find you and work with you?
So the easiest way is through my website, which is just called the same as my name. So it's www.paulinatrevena.com. Or you can find me on socials, on Facebook under No Woo Woo, LinkedIn, Dr. Paulina Trevena, Twitter, Trevena. And yes, and I kind of specialize with hypnotherapists, especially I work with people on fears, phobias, anxiety, low self-worth, low self-esteem, which is often the things that people with ADHD struggle with. and for people with aphantasia, as I say, I kind of have an approach where you don't need to visualize, I kind of play around with different techniques. Or if there's any professional associations that think that they actually need this knowledge on aphantasia and the non-visualization, then feel free to get in touch, because I am really passionate about raising awareness of it, because I think in many contexts you kind of need this awareness. So yeah.
Thank you so much, that was so fascinating. And yeah, I will put in the description some links for your website and things for people to follow through, so they can look there in the description as well. Thank you so much, Paulina, that was great.
Thank you, Jay. Thanks so much.